Hello and welcome to the first Interstitial video of my Let's Play Halo project. This video is going to act as a prequel or prologue to bridge the gap between the end of Halo 1 and the start of Halo 2. Not every transition between games is going to require a lot of explanation, but there's actually quite a big gap between these first two. Now, I don't consider these spoilers because we're going to find them out before even touching a gun in the first video, but I'll sum it up in two main points. At the start of Halo 2, the Master Chief and Cortana have made it back to Earth, and Sgt Johnson has made it back with them, the only other survivor from Halo. The game will not explain how this happened, and in fact, it will poke fun at the fact that it doesn't explain it. But before we get to the how, I want to talk about the who. Sergeant Major Avery Johnson. You may have noticed during the playthrough of Halo 1 that he was really the only Marine we name-dropped, and him becoming a main character in the series is the reason why. Now, I will probably never be convinced that Sgt Johnson was originally planned to survive Halo. The Master Chief and Cortana being the sole survivors just makes too much sense narratively and thematically for it to be true. Not to mention that the Marines were built as archetypes, cookie-cutter cliché characters to be dropped in mostly interchangeably. Sgt Johnson himself is very obviously directly based on Gunnery Sergeant Apone from Aliens, and if the intention was to make him a main character, I feel like they would have gone with something more original. As best as I can figure, David Scully, who voices the character, was just straight up so good at his job and such a great guy to work with that Bungie couldn't let him go. Most of the big sergeant-y dialogue ends up going to him. The pump-up speech during the opening cutscene, rescuing Marines in the second level, riding the tank in the fifth level, and even the silly bonus scene in the final cutscene of the game. By the time the game was complete, Bungie themselves liked the character so much that they used him in a whole bunch of promotional videos.
My name is Sgt Johnson. When you are not in my presence, you can call me anything your degenerate hearts desire, assuming your tiny brains can string together a couple of cuss words. These hateful little bastards may appear cheap and easy, but they're but the tip of a vulgar iceberg. F them, or by God, they will f you! Thanks for helping out.
No problem.
Haha! Halo, combat evolved. Buy one. Heck, buy two. That's an order, soldier.
Now, narratively, his survival causes a little problem. As mentioned before, we saw Sgt Johnson a number of times throughout the game, and honestly, he didn't survive most of those encounters. And while it's easy enough to say that the times where he died, it wasn't the real Sgt Johnson, and the times he survived, it was, there's only one appearance that matters, and I've kinda tricked you here. The Sgt Johnson that shows up in the helmet cam cutscene during the reveal of the Flood actually survives that encounter. He is the real, canonical Sgt Johnson, and his escape is illustrated in the first Halo graphic novel. This is where we're going to start transitioning into the how of it all. But I should warn you that bonus videos like this will not be following my limited extended universe canon guideline. That's where all this information comes from, after all. Most of the detail in this video is covered in the novel First Strike by Eric Nylund, the third Halo book to be published. As of now, there's around 30 of them. I also want to mention to any other fellow pedantic Halo nerds that I am intentionally streamlining a lot of the information to make it more palatable, so some of what follows isn't 100% accurate. As often happens with supporting characters in a popular and expanding franchise, a lot of details about Sgt Johnson's backstory started getting thrown in from a lot of different sources. For example, in another novel, Contact Harvest by Joseph Staten, Sgt Johnson turns out to be, canonically, the first human to see, talk to, and kill an alien, and not actually in that order. He was present at First Contact and the very start of the Human Covenant War. And I want to point out that Joseph Staten isn't some random author making things up. He was the director of cinematics for Bungie's Halo games. In the very first video, I gave a synopsis of the story from the Halo 1 booklet, and I mentioned that Master Chief is a Spartan 2 super soldier. So what about the Spartan 1s? As I'm sure you can guess from that lead-in, yes, Sgt Johnson is in fact a Spartan 1 super soldier, a participant in the Orion project, which was the UNSC's first attempt at creating super soldiers. This heavily classified project was obviously a lot less intensive than the Master Chief's whole cyborgification, which is a topic that I hope to talk about in a later video. The Orion project was more like Captain America's origin story, largely an injectable gene therapy to make the subject stronger and faster, both physically and mentally. The project was a success, but was eventually shut down and buried as the results did not justify the cost, in dollars and in complications. Still, Sgt Johnson's modified DNA made him resistant to flood infection, and gave him the increased speed, skill, and stamina required to fight his way out of the flood-infested installation and regroup with the remaining human forces. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's go back to the end of Halo 1. The Master Chief and Cortana have successfully detonated the Pillar of Autumn's reactor and destroyed Halo, narrowly escaping in a longsword fighter, notably a small ship without the ability to get them back to Earth. Cortana scans their surroundings and finds nothing, just dust and echoes. Of course, this is very obviously wrong. After the curtains close on the game, they detect a single surviving Pelican dropship with Sgt Johnson and a handful of other UNSC personnel on board. It sounds mean, but I'm not going to name any of them because, well, they don't make it to the end of the story. Even stranger though, they also find the cryopod containing the injured Spartan Linda 058. Remember the Easter egg I showed off in the first video? Apparently Captain Keyes must have thought she would have better odds of survival floating in space rather than being on board during a crash landing. Now might be a good time to point out that Spartan 2s don't have last names, just a number designation. The Master Chief is actually John 117, but I'll just mostly refer to them by first name. Using the longsword and Pelican, our group makes a guerrilla strike on one of the Covenant ships still loitering around Halo's wreckage, and manages to board and commandeer it. Another detail that was mentioned in the first Halo 1 video is the Cole Protocol. One aspect of this protocol is that a ship cannot travel directly to Earth if there are Covenant around, and this goes double for an actual Covenant ship that may have some type of tracking device on board. They have to make a slipspace jump, this franchise's version of faster-than-light travel, on a non-Earth vector first to ensure that they are not followed. They decide to head to Reach, which is the planet they were running away from at the beginning of Halo 1 that the Covenant completely destroyed. The plan is to find a working or repairable human ship to take back to Earth, or at the very least gather some intelligence along the way. When they arrive at Reach, they find that their assumption was wrong. The Covenant did not destroy the colony. They are still there conducting ground operations, which is very much not their style. The Master Chief decides that while Cortana continues the plan to find a usable human ship, he will lead a team to the surface to try and figure out what the Covenant are up to, and to disrupt them if possible. Once on the surface, the Master Chief finds that the Covenant are focused on a specific high-security research and development facility called Castle Base. Castle Base is notable for being the headquarters of the Spartan 2 program several decades earlier. In the process of fighting the Covenant, the Master Chief finds a number of surviving UNSC personnel, including a Vice Admiral, Dr. Halsey, a senior scientist and mother of the Spartan 2 program, and a bunch of Spartans, in no particular order: Kelly, Fred, Grace, Will, Anton, and Lee. It turns out that the Covenant are looking for something that Dr. Halsey already has in her possession, a Forerunner artifact found buried deep beneath Reach's surface. This artifact is just a MacGuffin for the book. It's a crystal that has the ability to warp space and time, which is as weird as it sounds, and it ends up being destroyed, so I won't mention it again. Our now extremely capable group of humans escape the Covenant and rendezvous with Cortana in orbit. In their absence, she has not only found a suitable human ship, but actually welded it to the Covenant ship, so she can use both their reactors to power the engines and weapons. She has also used the Covenant ship to intercept their communications on Reach, and has discovered that the Covenant are amassing a fleet at a rally point before heading to their next target, Earth. The humans and their abomination of a ship engage the remaining Covenant forces in a ship-to-ship space battle before fleeing Reach, again. In this battle, Spartans Anton and Lee are killed. The group pauses in deep space to plan their next move. Dr. Halsey manages to revive and heal Linda in her cryotube, but soon after kidnaps Kelly and disappears using a salvaged ship on board. Despite this odd turn of events, the humans come up with a plan. The crew is going to split up. They will drop the Spartans off at the Covenant rally point, where they will attempt to destroy the Covenant command ship and otherwise sabotage their efforts in any way they can. The rest will head straight to Earth to warn them and prepare defenses. There's really no point to the Cole Protocol now that the Covenant knows where Earth is. The Spartans do manage to board the command ship and rig its reactors to blow, very similar to what the Master Chief and Cortana did to the Pillar of Autumn on Halo. Unfortunately, Grace is killed during the operation. The surviving Spartans, John, Linda, Fred, and Will, escape from the command ship and try to get as far away as possible before it explodes. During their escape, they discover that the rest of their group has abandoned the plan to go to Earth and came back for them. They rendezvous with them, but find only the human ship with Cortana and Sgt Johnson on board. The Vice Admiral and the remaining UNSC crew have taken the Covenant ship and used themselves as bait to lure as many of the enemy as possible towards the doomed command ship. It works, and the majority of the Covenant ships, including their own, are destroyed in the blast. The remaining human survivors leave the crippled attack fleet and continue the mission to Earth to warn the UNSC of the impending attack. And that will catch us up to the point where Halo 2 begins. The Master Chief, Cortana, and Sgt Johnson have survived Halo and made it back to Earth. It's worth keeping in mind that the Master Chief is definitely not the last surviving Spartan 2, although that detail will remain in the extended universe canon for the foreseeable future. If you managed to make it all the way through, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you'll continue to follow along as we begin Let's Play Halo 2.